Hi everybody, my name's Nike and I'm the Warrior Witch here on YouTube and on Instagram. I told you guys I would be back, and as promised, like 2 months later, who's counting? Here I am! And today I want to talk about building your witch kit. Whether on purpose or by happenstance, every witch ends up with a selection of items that become their go-to tools, whether that be in spells, rituals, or daily practice. This can also change based on what the individual is specifically doing in that moment. So for example, you might have one kit that you use for all of your religious work, but a completely different one with no crossover for your spell work if you really don't bring your deities into the mix. I call this specific assembly of your core go-to tools your witch kit. This isn't to say that I don't incorporate my less frequently used tools into my kit when I need them. It's more about what my immediate reaches are when I need things. For example, herbs that I like to go to right away versus a specific herb I'll use for a specific purpose but really don't use all that much otherwise. Some of it is also going to vary based on whether you're at home or out in the world away from your altar space. I am a little bit more involved and more obvious for obvious reasons when I'm at home, but if I'm out and about, I won't have access to all of my normal supplies that I would have here, and I also don't want to be as obvious about it. I want to be a little bit more subtle. There's also things that I can't do longer term, like a 7-day candle that has to be burned on the location, or for the most part, I don't want to bury things that aren't in my own property, so some of that will also be limited and changes what my go-tos would be. So rather than a 7-day candle, I might go for a sachet, or I might do a petition. So I have a home kit and a travel kit for this reason. When looking at what you want to go into your witch kit, we first need to start with what is accessible to you in the first place, and I am all about accessibility and sustainability, especially if I can do it for free or cheap. You don't need to go bankrupt to do magic successfully. So first we'll start with the intangible, things that you don't need to buy, things that don't need to be physical items, and for me this is nature walks and prayers if you are of the religious persuasion. I love going on nature walks. In my area there's a lot of nature preserves and just green walking paths that are for the most part untouched and a little wild, and I know that they don't use any sprays, and for me this is one, a place I can go foraging a little bit, and also two, a great meditative experience. And if I want to connect with nature or with the land spirits, this is something that I don't need to even show anybody. I could be walking with somebody and doing meditations, doing internal prayers. I could be doing all of this work all on my own and nobody need know, and it doesn't cost me a thing except my time to go out in the world and explore these places. One of the most accessible things, in my opinion, is local plants. While neighborhood plants are readily available, they also don't come without their own risks. I love a good lilac, and I use them in my workings a lot, but unless I grew them myself, I will never burn them or put them into something that is supposed to come into contact with my body or be ingested internally. Instead, I might sprinkle them on a plate around a candle rather than putting them into the candle to burn with it. And the reason for this is I don't know what the homeowner uses to take care of their land. I don't know if they hire services to spray their land with pesticides or any kind of bug repellents. I don't know what the condition of their land is. I don't know if their home has some kind of environmentally unfriendly or unsafe leak. So if I don't have the property myself, if I don't own the property, and if I don't know the property owners very well, like my parents, I'm typically just going to use them in spell work outside, usually sprinkled around or put into a sachet. Just not stuff that's going to be burnt or ingested or put on my body like in oil or with kitchen magic. Backyards, I think, are a criminally underutilized resource. In my parents' own yard, I have seen a huge variety of plants, including the trifecta of being edible, useful for medicinal purposes, and useful in witchcraft. Included are, of course, your classic clover and dandelion, but I've also seen Virginia waterleaf, burdock, lily of the valley, and among other plants, a very cute one that looks very much like ground ivy called bugleweed. I love seeing the wild plants pop up every year, and for me, part of that is also in honor of the seasons. So what things will pop up first when spring really starts to get warm? What is more of a middle summer thing? What is a late summer thing? Even just in the backyard, you can see these cycles and changes coming about and coming into play right before your very eyes. You don't need to necessarily be traveling and going all over the place to see the subtle changes of seasons, to see that every plant has its own season. And to be honest, I could probably make myself a witch kit based off plants I can find in my parents' backyard alone. Let's talk pen and paper. Everybody's got access to pen and paper. You could steal a scrap of paper from your job, and there's probably those crappy Bic pens that are going to be everywhere. You can find a pen and paper anywhere you go. You could ask for one at like a service counter. If you're staying at a hotel, you could ask the receptionist or the front desk person for a pen and paper. You could use those things and be very successful. And you could even use them without anything else. Your kit could be entirely pen and paper based. This could be for petitions. You could write out prayers. You could make sigils. So you can do a lot with just a pen and paper alone. And I mentioned sustainability and accessibility. One thing that I really love is reusing kitchen jars. So when I have gone through like a pasta sauce or something, I will clean it out, usually remove the label, and I will fill that with whatever herb I've collected or supply that I'm using. So there's no need for me to necessarily throw away that container if I can use it for myself and also save myself the extra money of not having to go out and buy, for example, more mason jars. Next, thrift stores, dollar stores, and Walmart. A lot of your really basic witch supplies can come from really normal stores, including specifically with the dollar store and Walmart, getting herbs from the kitchen section. You know that they're edible, you know that they are safe, and they're usually pretty cheap. You don't have to have the best stuff out there on the market or some fancy herb to do workings. Kitchen herbs are incredibly useful, and I am planning a video about this very soon. And lastly, for accessibility, don't discount the power of a DIY. Now, this thing behind me here is not necessarily DIY specifically, but it very easily can be. And it's essentially just twine wrapped around a rope that then hangs down and uses little tiny clothespins to hold the plants onto it. So this is my little plant drying station right now. Incredibly useful, very easy to DIY. And I have DIY'd a couple of different things for my practice. I will make my own oils. I will make my own hanging stations. I've made my own wand. I've made my own runes. A lot of DIY, for the most part, is gonna be cheaper than buying stuff online if you're willing to forego things like, I don't need my runes to be made out of amethyst. They can very easily be made out of glass beads and a paint marker, which I have done before. Very simple stuff, and DIY is a wonderful way to connect yourself to your craft as well. You've made it, you had access to it, you don't have to worry about going anywhere, and if you know what it's made of, you know much more how you're going to connect with it. Heck, I've just collected rocks from outside and drawn runes on them and made a rune set out of that too. And so that is connecting with the local land spirits as well as being something that I made for and by myself. The next factor to consider when building your witch kit is what are you comfortable with specifically? For example, if you're not very well versed in astrology, why would you incorporate something that you're not comfortable with, something you don't feel very well versed with? I am not super ceremonial, so I don't include a lot of ceremonial stuff. I don't incorporate herbal medicine right now because I don't feel very well versed in it, and I don't want to risk any ill effects of if I get this thing wrong and ingest it, is that going to be harmful to me? So I don't go with the things that I'm not very comfortable with, things I don't feel safe with, and instead I focus on what does feel like is in my wheelhouse. Now that's not to say that I'm not going to experiment here and there with things to open my eyes and spread my wings a little bit, but for the most part my core go-tos, which is what this is all about, my core go-tos are going to be the things that are sort of tried and true. Now like I mentioned earlier, some of this is going to be dependent on where you are, but this section I really mean where you live, where you are on the day-to-day. I have lived in towns as small as 3,000 people, and I've lived in giant metro areas like the Twin Cities, and both come with their own pros and cons that really do need to be considered, and there's different things that I need to incorporate into my witch kit to compensate for the things that they lack and things that might go in because they have them in an abundance. While large metro areas like the Twin Cities have their advantages in terms of tools and bookstores and thrift stores being more widely available, they tend to lack in clean, natural areas where you can forage without concern. On the flip side, small town America has, for the most part, at least where I live, the opposite problem. Where it lacks in conventional stores and the availability of common commercial resources, it makes up for in untouched nature trails and forested areas and nature preserves. What if you're super new, you've really only just started, and you don't really know yet what you like or want to use? How would you know if you go to the store what you can grab and pick up and put into your kit, or try to just use an experiment to see if you want it in your kit? How would you know? And, for the most part, you're not going to. Now, there is a resource out there for the people who are unsure of what they want, or for the more experienced people that are looking to branch out into something, that if you're willing to throw a little money at the problem, can easily fix it. And that is Witch's subscription boxes. This video is, I don't know if I want to say sponsored. I think sponsored. We'll go with it. This video is sponsored by the Witch's Moon. They were kind enough to send me their Druidry themed box because they wanted me to be able to take a look at what they've got, explore it, and talk to you guys about it. And honestly, this kit was really cool. It came with, to start, an oracle card and an info sheet wrapped up together. So the oracle card was a goddess of creation. It was really beautiful, and this can be incorporated into your magic in all sorts of ways. And the info sheet goes line by line through every single item, what it is, how you might be able to use it, and why they put it in the box. So they put a lot of thought into a themed box to put together a lot of these items for you so that you can use them, you can experiment with them, and you can get a feel for, is this theme what I'm kind of looking for? They also come with some useful information and tools in the form of knowledge. So one of the things that was included was an opening of the Grove ritual relating to the book that we'll get to in a second that is inside the box. And this also has a really beautiful Celtic knot design around on the outside, and this ritual incantation can be used in your practice, whether it's specifically how it's used in the book or whether you adapt it for your own stuff. But it's a great starting place for you if you've not really done much with incantations before. There's also a black lava stone info sheet, so it just talks about all of the properties of black lava stone, its associations, all that kind of stuff. There is a Druidry Book of Shadows page, which is also illustrated. Lots of information on Druidry itself. Again, it's the theme of the box. It includes a book called The Druid Path by John Michael Greer. Now, I have not read much of John Michael Greer's work myself, but from what I hear from my Druid friends, he has really good information on Druidry, but just be aware that he has some contentious views, shall we say, about medicine and vaccines. So while you're reading his work, just make sure you take that with a grain of salt, like you should always be doing with any author you're reading. Don't just take anybody on their face value when they say that they're an expert or when they give you an opinion. Do your own research. Double check. It also comes with a few more herbal-based items, as one might expect from a Druidry kit, and that includes some ritual salts, which have some of the herbs inside. There is also a Palo Santo copal ritual incense, which can go with the ritual inside the book or can be used off on its own. There is something called the Golden Sickle Herbal Blend, which the info packet also talks more about, and the Druid Vision Herbal Blend. Both of these smell amazing, and I'm really excited to be able to use them in my own workings. And there's also a tree guide oil. I love oils in my work, so anytime a kit's gonna come with oils, oh, it gets me so excited. I love it so much. It also came with one of my other favorites, which is a green beeswax candle, and it has this really gorgeous honeycomb pattern all around it. It's really soft. It doesn't feel like the cheap, gross wax you get at the store, and it's just really lovely. And I think beeswax candles are so cool because if you make them yourself, you can actually sprinkle the herbs on the sheet because it comes as a sheet, and then you can roll it up around the wick, and that way your herbs are inside the candle, not necessarily exposed on the outside. You don't have to worry about poking holes in the top of a candle and shoving the herbs down inside. You can just roll them right up with some oils and stuff, and there you go, bing bang boom, you're done. One of the other cool things that this kit came with was a pre-split geode, so if you're a crystal girly, this is pretty cool. I'm pretty sure it's just a quartz geode, but it was really pretty, and one of the chunks that split off looked like a crescent moon, so I could use that in some lunar workings as well. I think it's really rad. And finally was the lava stone candle holder, and the info sheet talks about how you can feed this candle holder oils and keep it conditioned that way. You can stick a little tea light light candle on the inside and not worry about it. Honestly, this is super useful for me because I've moved away from glass tea light holders and glass candle holders because I've had them shatter on me just sitting around with the heat too many times. And I kind of got sick of having to pick shards of glass off the floor, so I'm really excited to have this. It'll be really nice, and it's hefty. Like, it's a good weight, and I like the feeling of lava stone. So if you like lava stone, again, if you're a crystal girly, that's definitely gonna be right up your alley. And finally, a small detail that I really liked about this kit is that it came with some decently eco-friendly packaging by comparison to a lot of the packaging you'll see in just general items that you order online. It's got this zigzag cardboard cushion stuff, I don't know what you call it, the filler, and a lot of the things were wrapped in paper as much as they could, or twine, stuff that is easy to recycle or reuse, and they only seem to use plastic or bubble wrap where they absolutely had to, like with the glass jar for the oil. I think that subscription boxes and pre-made kits like this can be super useful, especially when it's made by people within our community, and it's a really good starting point for if you just need to get some idea of what a kit might look like, or some idea of what some supplies in a kit might look like. They usually send you things that are going to be actively useful in your craft, and it's a great way to say, well, I don't know what I need yet, so what do you got for me? Big note that I'll say is that you need to remain flexible. Your craft will evolve over time. I don't know a single witch or spiritual practitioner or pagan or whatever label you want to use. I don't know a single practitioner whose practice has not changed, especially drastically most of the time. The majority of the time, those changes are not going to be subtle little steps over the years. If you look back even 2 or 3 years in my practice, huge difference by comparison to what I'm doing now. And so you gotta remain flexible and let it change with time. Be willing to reevaluate, what do you actually use right now? When's the last time you touched this item or this kind of item? Do you think you'll be using it again soon, or is it okay to put it up on the shelf and replace it with something you know you're going to use more often? For my practice, as an example, it started very lunar heavy in particular and started incorporating some of the astrology aspects. I've always been more into candles, and I slowly started incorporating things like oils, but for the most part, the lunar astrology stuff was the big thing. Meanwhile, nowadays, a lot of my practice is focusing on herbs and powders and concoctions and much more heavy focus on oils, and it's a lot of making them myself right now. So that shift kind of went from being a little bit more ethereal and less tangible to very much in the dirt, on the ground, foraging things, making my own powders and blends and oils and things. That's a pretty big shift. Plus that shift that I had from pretty heavily Greek to pretty heavily Norse, with a little bit of that Greek influence still sprinkled in there. And even now, my practice is still changing a little bit. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm starting to venture into some supplemental herbal medicine. So, you know, if I'm cold or I've got some cramps, I don't want to necessarily have to run out to the store when I could just make myself a little tea to help with, like raspberry leaf and things like that. If I could make some stuff on my own at home, especially stuff I grew myself, that's really fulfilling for me. And also means that if I'm sick or in pain and I don't have to leave the house, extra bonus. I'm also focusing a little bit more on edible plant foraging. As an example, recently I made myself a little dinner with my partner that incorporated some daylilies, because daylilies are edible. Every single part is edible, and for me, I think that it's really fun to be able to just go out into your back garden, pick yourself a little dinner, and you didn't have to go anywhere, and you made it yourself. I do want to mention that anytime you plan to burn any plant, like in a smoke bundle or in a candle, or if you plan to have anything that's going to come into close contact with your body, like with oils or perfumes or bath salts, and especially if you plan to ingest them, such as with kitchen witchery or your everyday cooking, you need to be extremely diligent in your research. This is not an area to slack off. You also need to be able to identify lookalikes. Now, I can identify yarrow versus carrot versus hemlock myself these days, but it's really easy to mix up specifically hemlock and carrot, and both grow here. I just found recently some hemlock down by a place where kids play a lot of the time, and I picked it not necessarily for magical uses, but because it can be dangerous if a kid decides that they want to put it in their mouth, because kids do that sometimes. So being able to identify that can be really useful for your safety, if you have children or pets, for their safety, because you never know if they're going to try to munch on stuff. I know a lot of animals especially will just munch on random plants that they see and don't necessarily have the instincts to stay away from everything. some animals do and some don't, and we love them anyway. When I'm looking to properly identify a plant for foraging and for putting into my witch kit because I know I want to use it, I look at 3 main factors, and that is the flower itself, the stem, and the leaves. If all 3 factors do not line up to what they're supposed to, I don't assume that just because 2 factors match that the 3rd is irrelevant. All 3 have to match up in order for it to be safe. I've become familiar with a local collection of plants that definitely grow in the area every year, and I love watching where each of them will pop up throughout the seasons. And some of these plants are things like mullein and toadflax, which is a species of snapdragon, curly dock, goldenrod, and I can identify a lot of them without concern because I've taken this time to get to know the land and to study what's around here, what the lookalikes are, and what the key identifying traits are. Now, with regard to if you plan to do a lot of foraging and picking your own plants and everything, even if it's in your own yard, the big thing to also remember is to wash your plants when you get home, because the flowers are growing, the trees are blooming, and so are the bugs. In our area, we have to be especially careful because there's a lot of dangerous bugs out there, including brown recluse spiders. So just make sure that you wash them off. Even if they're harmless, you still want some of them creepy crawlies off of you and off of the plants. And that way you know that they're completely clean from anything that might be on them, bugs or otherwise. And then you can hang them up to dry in whatever way that you choose, and you're good to go. More important than what is actually in your kit as an individual item is getting to know the items in it. It's not so much about what the item is and having the right thing and having this plant versus this plant or having this tool or this knife or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, it matters that you know how to use it and it works for you. It may be a great item, but it just might not work for me. I like using tarot, but there's certain decks that I don't even necessarily like reading with so much. There's certain rune sets that I have that I don't like using as much as I like using others. So I pick my tools very specifically and very carefully, and when I'm going to have something be my usual go-to, it's because I've gotten to know it really well. And if you have some staples that you reach for a lot, but you haven't gotten to know them very intimately, use this as your motivation to do that. If it's a plant, get to know it when it's growing and living versus dried. How does it feel? What does it say to you? Meditate with it. You could, if it's safe, ingest it. See how it makes your body feel. How does it respond to you? It may also respond to you differently when it comes from the grocery store versus being foraged and dried that way. If it's a deck, get to know how it reads, sort of the language that it speaks, how it feels in your hand, how it fits in with the rest of your tools, get to know it energetically, that kind of stuff. Get to know your tools. You're going to be using them a lot, you should be intimately familiar with them. The better and more intimately you know your tools, the more confident you will ultimately feel in your practice and in your workings. As a summary, number 1 point, as always, be safe. Don't burn things or ingest them or put them on your body without knowing 100% certain what that plant is, and if you have any allergies to that plant. Use caution even in spell work because there are harmful lookalikes, and if you've made a mistake, you want to make sure that you're being extra careful. Neighborhood flowers are pretty, but if you didn't grow them yourself, stick to just sprinkling around the candle or putting them into spell bags at a maximum. Be flexible. Your kit will always be changing just like your practice will, and you shouldn't be afraid to switch things out as you go. And get to know your tools. They're tools to be used. You should know how they're going to work, how they feel, how you like them, your relationship with them. Take the time. This path is meant to be lifelong, so you've got all the time in the world to take days or weeks or months with each individual thing in your kit, each individual go-to item that you reach for, to get to know them and to understand them within your practice and within your life and within your spell work and how it mixes in with your other tools. Get to know the whole kit of all of your go-tos so that you can feel the most confident and successful in your practice and your workings. As always, thanks for joining me on another video. I'll be back around at some point soon. I've got some fun videos planned out coming up real fast, so within the next month or so I expect you'll see my face again. If you want to follow me, you can follow me here on YouTube if you're not already subscribed, or you can follow me on Instagram. I post photos and things like that every now and again. And if you want to join a community, which is another super useful tool, you can join my Discord community with the link down below in the description. We've got discussions that come up every now and again. We've got lots of people in there that if you want a little advice, you can get some expertise from other people. You can share your opinions. You can see how everybody's practice varies. And you can even talk about this topic right here and talk to people about what are their go-tos, what's in their witch kit. So if you feel like it, join the community. Otherwise, I'll see you around, and blessed be, y'all.